Chicago rain never washes away sins. It only makes the pavement slick enough for the guilty to slide by. When 28-year-old single mother Selena Jennings spotted a blood-spattered Tom Ford briefcase abandoned on a deserted L train platform, every instinct screamed at her to keep walking. She should have gone home to her sick 6-year-old son and forgotten the metallic stench of copper and expensive leather. Desperation, however, is a ruthless compass. She forced open the brass locks, praying for enough cash to erase a mountain of hospital bills. Instead, she uncovered a loaded Glock 19, banded cartel cash, and a chilling, crumpled photograph of her very own wedding day. The bitter wind coming off Lake Michigan was enough to freeze the breath in a person's lungs, but Selena Jennings barely felt it. Her mind was entirely consumed by a number: $14,280. It was the outstanding balance at Lurie Children's Hospital for her son Leo's severe asthma treatments and the recent bout of pneumonia that had nearly taken his life. Selena pulled her frayed Patagonia winter coat tighter around her slender frame, her worn boots slipping slightly on the icy pavement as she walked away from Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse. She had just finished a brutal 14-hour double shift, serving prime rib and $1,000 bottles of Cabernet to men in bespoke suits who looked through her as if she were made of glass. She didn't mind the invisibility. She minded the meager tips. Tonight, she had walked away with $84. It wasn't even enough to cover Leo's emergency albuterol inhaler, let alone the rent for their cramped, drafty apartment in Logan Square. The Clark Lake Station was a cavernous, echoing tomb at 2 in the morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering and casting long, sickly shadows across the concrete platform. Selena was entirely alone, save for a stray pigeon pecking at a discarded wrapper. She sank onto a wooden bench, rubbing her aching temples, waiting for the Blue Line train to carry her back to her reality. That was when she saw it. Tucked beneath the steel bench directly across from her, half hidden in the shadows, sat a briefcase. It was midnight black, crafted from supple, unblemished leather, with gleaming brass hardware that caught the flickering overhead light. Even from 10 feet away, Selena could tell it cost more than she made in a year. For 10 minutes, she simply stared at it. Nobody came down the stairs. No frantic businessmen rushed back onto the platform. The automated voice announced her train was 2 minutes away. Selena stood, her legs trembling slightly. "Leave it," a voice in her head warned. Things left alone in the dark belong to the dark, but the crushing weight of that $14,280 pushed her forward. She crossed the platform. As she reached for the handle, her fingers brushed against something wet and sticky on the underside of the leather. She pulled her hand back, her breath catching in her throat. Under the harsh station lights, her fingertips were stained a dark, rusty crimson. Blood. Panic flared in her chest, urging her to run, but the rumble of the approaching train broke her paralysis. With a sudden, reckless surge of adrenaline, she grabbed the handle, wiped her bloody fingers on her dark jeans, and stepped onto the nearly empty train, the briefcase heavy against her leg. Back in her small Logan Square apartment, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, slightly wheezy breathing of 6-year-old Leo sleeping in the single bedroom. Selena sat at her scratched laminate kitchen table, a single yellow bulb illuminating the stolen object before her. The brass locks were secured, requiring a 3-digit combination. She didn't have tools, but the leather around the right latch was already damaged, scored by what looked like a bullet graze. Taking a flathead screwdriver from her kitchen drawer, she wedged it beneath the damaged brass and pushed with all her might. With a sharp, metallic crack, the lock gave way. Selena lifted the lid. The scent of fresh ink, cordite, and copper filled the small kitchen. She gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Neatly arranged on the left side were thick, rubber-banded stacks of $100 bills, hundreds of thousands of dollars. On the right, sitting atop a manila folder, rested a matte black Glock 19 handgun, a silencer screwed tightly onto its barrel. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't corporate money. This was cartel money, mafia money, blood money. Trembling, she reached past the weapon and the cash to pull out the manila folder. It was heavy, sealed with a red wax stamp bearing the insignia of a two-headed eagle. She broke the seal and tipped the contents onto the table. Several USB flash drives spilled out, alongside heavily redacted financial ledgers and property deeds. But it was the single, glossy photograph, mixed in with the documents, that made the blood drain entirely from Selina's face. It was a candid photo, taken from a distance, of a young woman laughing in a white dress, a man with a gentle smile kissing her cheek. It was Selina, and her late husband, David. David had died in a fiery multi-car pileup on the I-93 years ago. The police told her there was barely anything left to identify. He had been a low-level accountant for a logistics firm, a quiet, boring man who loved Sunday crosswords and baseball. Why was a picture of her dead, unremarkable husband inside a blood-soaked briefcase belonging to the underworld? She flipped the photograph over. Written on the back in elegant, sharp cursive were 4 words: "The ghost owes a debt." Beneath the photo was a heavy, embossed black business card. It bore no name, only a stylized double-headed eagle and a single address: 77 West Wacker Drive, Penthouse, the headquarters of Castellano Enterprises. Even waitresses in Chicago knew the name Castellano. They owned the ports, the construction unions, and half the politicians in the state. Selina stared at the stacks of money. She could take it, pack Leo into her rusted Honda Civic, and disappear into the night. But the photograph anchored her. They knew who she was. If she ran, they would find her. The only reason a cartel boss kept a photo of a widow was as collateral. A cold, terrifying resolve settled over her. She couldn't run from the shadows. She had to step directly into them. The next morning, the Chicago skyline was a jagged silhouette against a bruised gray sky. Selina stood outside the gleaming glass monolith of 77 West Wacker Drive. She had dressed in her only decent piece of clothing, a black morning dress she hadn't worn since David's funeral, and a pair of sensible flats. The Tom Ford briefcase felt like a bomb ticking in her right hand. Before leaving the apartment, she had done the unthinkable. She had unbanded one of the stacks of money and counted out exactly $1,200. It was the exact amount she needed for Leo's immediate pharmacy refill and the threatening final notice electricity bill. She had replaced the cash with a handwritten note. Stepping into the marble-floored lobby, she bypassed the main reception and walked straight toward a private bank of elevators guarded by 2 men in impeccably tailored charcoal suits. They looked like former linebackers, their eyes scanning her with cold, predatory efficiency. "I'm here to return lost property," Selina said, her voice remarkably steady despite the violent shaking in her knees. She placed the briefcase on the small security podium. To the owner of this, the taller guard's eyes dropped to the briefcase. A flicker of something, was it fear, crossed his stoic features when he saw the bullet graze on the leather. He touched an earpiece, murmuring rapidly in Italian. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched for 2 minutes. Finally, the guard stepped aside, gesturing to the gold-plated elevator doors. "Top floor. Do not stop on any other level." The elevator ride was a silent ascent to the executioner's block. When the doors slid open, Selina stepped into a world of incomprehensible wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the frozen Chicago River. The office was vast, decorated in dark mahogany, leather, and abstract art that likely cost more than a hospital wing. Standing by the window, his back to her, was Damien Castellano. He didn't look like a mobster from the movies. As he turned, Selina saw a man in his early 30s, possessing a brutal, sharp-angled beauty. His dark hair was impeccably styled, and his bespoke Brioni suit draped perfectly over a broad, athletic frame. But his eyes, a striking, pale ice blue, were completely dead. They were the eyes of a man who measured human life in spreadsheets and bullets. "My men tell me a waitress from Logan Square walked through my front doors carrying a ghost," Damien said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded the massive room without effort. He walked slowly to his massive mahogany desk and gestured to a leather chair. Selina didn't sit. She stepped forward and placed the briefcase on the desk. "I found it at the Clark. Lake Station at 2 this morning, Selena said, keeping her chin high, refusing to let him see her terror. I opened it to see who it belonged to. I brought it back. Damien didn't look at the briefcase. He looked only at her, his pale eyes dissecting her. You opened it. And yet, you are standing here. Most people would be halfway to Mexico by now. Mrs. Jennings. Selena's breath hitched. He knew her name. Without her saying a word, he knew exactly who she was. I saw the photograph, Selena said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Why do you have a picture of my dead husband? Mr. Castellano? Damien finally broke his gaze from her, looking down at the damaged brass lock. He popped it open with a flick of his thumbs. He didn't check the gun. He didn't check the ledgers. His long, elegant fingers went straight to the cash. He flipped through the top stack, his brow furrowing infinitesimally. He pulled out the torn piece of notebook paper Selena had left inside. Damien read the note aloud, the corners of his mouth twitching in what might have been amusement or rage. I took $1,200 for my son's medical bills. I will repay you $50 a week until the debt is cleared. Signed, Selena Jennings. He looked up, pinning her with a gaze so intense she felt it in her bones. You stole from the Castellano syndicate, left an IOU, and then hand-delivered it to my office? I didn't steal, Selena said fiercely, the maternal instinct to protect Leo overriding her fear. I borrowed. It was an emergency. And considering my husband's photo is in there, I figured you owed me an explanation, which is worth at least $1,200. Damien leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. David Jennings did not die in a car crash, Selena. Your husband was my chief forensic accountant. He laundered $30 million for this family. And then, 3 years ago, he decided to siphon $8 million of it into a private offshore account, handed our shipping manifests to the FBI, and faked his own death. The room seemed to spin. Selena gripped the edge of the mahogany desk to keep from collapsing. No. David was a low-level clerk. He couldn't even lie about eating the last piece of cake. You're insane. I am perfectly sane, Damien replied softly. That briefcase contains the decryption keys to the $8 million he stole, which my courier recovered last night before he was ambushed by a rival faction. I have been looking for your husband for 3 years. I assumed he took you and the boy with him, but my surveillance showed he left you in the dirt to pay his debts. Selena felt a tear slip hot down her cheek, but she angrily brushed it away. Her entire life, her grief, her poverty, Leo's suffering was built on a lie. Her husband was a traitor, a thief, and a coward who had abandoned his sick child. I don't know where he is, Selena whispered, her voice hollow. I have nothing to do with this. I brought your property back. Keep the $1,200 as severance for his betrayal. I want nothing to do with you or him. She turned on her heel and began marching toward the elevator. Mrs. Jennings, Damien called out, his voice snapping like a whip, halting her in her tracks. She looked back over her shoulder. By walking out of here with that briefcase last night, you left your fingerprints on a lock that a Russian Bratva hitman put a bullet into, Damien said coldly. The Volkov family knows the briefcase was dropped at the station. By tonight, they will check the transit security cameras. They will see you. You think returning this to me makes you free? You have just painted a target on your back and the back of your asthmatic son. Selena's stomach plummeted into an endless abyss. Go home, Selena, Damien said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand, turning back toward the floor-to-ceiling window. But pack a bag. The ghosts are coming for you. The L train ride back to Logan Square felt like a descent into purgatory. Selena's mind fractured in a dozen different directions. David was alive. He was a criminal. He had $8 million while she begged pharmacists for discounts on life-saving medicine for his son. And now, the Russian Mafia was coming for them. She burst into her apartment, her chest heaving. Leo, Mrs. Gable, she shouted for her son and the elderly neighbor who watched him while she worked. In here, sweetie, Mrs. Gable called from the living room. Leo was on the faded rug, carefully lining up his toy fire trucks, his small chest rising and falling with a slight, wheezing effort. Selena fell to her knees, pulling him into a desperate, crushing hug. "Mommy, you're squishing me," Leo complained, squirming in her grip. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry," she breathed into his soft hair. She looked at Mrs. Gable. "I need you to go home, Mrs. Gable. Thank you. I have to pack. We're going on a trip." The elderly woman frowned, sensing the frantic energy vibrating off Selena, but nodded and gathered her knitting. "All right, dear. You just call if you need anything." The moment the door clicked shut, Selena grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and began throwing clothes into it. Jeans, sweaters, Leo's dinosaur pajamas, his nebulizer, the backup inhalers she had just purchased with Damian Castellano's money. Where could they go? She had $60 to her name, excluding the Mafia cash she had just spent on the medicine. A heavy, violent thud echoed from the front door. Selena froze. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of a heavy boot testing the strength of the deadbolt. Thud. Crack. The door frame splintered. Selena grabbed Leo by the arm, dragging him toward the fire escape window in the bedroom. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Leo cried out, his breathing instantly hitching as panic set in. "Quiet, baby. Play a game with Mommy. We have to be quiet," she pleaded, tears blurring her vision as she threw the window open to the biting Chicago wind. Behind her, the front door gave way with a deafening crash. Heavy footsteps thundered into the small apartment, accompanied by voices speaking harsh, guttural Russian. "Search the rooms. Find the bitch and the kid," a rough voice commanded in accented English. Selena pushed Leo out onto the rusted iron grate of the fire escape, climbing out after him. The drop to the alley was 3 stories. The fire escape stairs were slick with black ice. She turned to grab the duffel bag, but a massive hand suddenly clamped around her throat, ripping her backward into the bedroom. She hit the floor hard, the air driven from her lungs in a painful rush. Standing over her was a giant of a man, half his face scarred by old burns. He held a silenced pistol by his side. "Where is the case?" he growled, grabbing her by her hair and hauling her to her knees. "I don't have it," Selena screamed, clawing at his thick wrist. "I gave it back to Castellano. I swear to God." Out on the fire escape, Leo began to cry, his small hands gripping the iron bars, his breathing turning into a high-pitched, terrifying wheeze. The Russian dragged Selena toward the window, aiming his gun at the terrified child. "You lie to me, American bitch," and I dropped the boy off the edge. Before the Russian could take another step, a sharp, suppressed proft sounded from the apartment hallway. A hole the size of a quarter blew through the glass of the bedroom mirror. The Russian stiffened, a look of profound confusion crossing his scarred face before he pitched forward, collapsing dead onto Selena's mattress. 2 more silenced shots rang out in the living room, followed by the heavy thuds of falling bodies. Selena scrambled backward, snatching Leo from the window ledge and curling her body over his as a man stepped over the dead Russian into her bedroom. He was dressed in a dark tactical jacket, a smoking Heckler & Koch pistol in his gloved hand. He looked down at Selena with a calm, professional detachment. "Mrs. Jennings," the man said smoothly. "My name is Matteo. Mr. Castellano sent me. It seems you didn't pack fast enough." Selena stared at the carnage in her tiny apartment, the blood soaking into her cheap carpet. She clutched Leo, who was now fully into an asthma attack, gasping for air against her chest. She fumbled wildly for the inhaler in her pocket, pressing it to his lips and pressing the canister. "You killed them," she whispered, looking at Matteo in horror. "I saved you," Matteo corrected, holstering his weapon. "The Volkov sent a cleanup crew. If Mr. Castellano hadn't put a tracker on you the moment you stepped out of his office, you and your boy would be in the trunk of a car right now." Matteo reached down, offering her a gloved hand. "You are coming with me, Mr. Castellano has a secure estate in Lake Forest. Until we find your husband and the money he stole, you belong to the syndicate." Selena looked at the offered hand. Returning the briefcase hadn't freed her. It had only bound her tighter to the monster at the top of the food chain. She was no longer a waitress struggling to pay bills. She was a pawn in a war she didn't understand, paying for the sins of a husband she thought she had buried. She slapped Matteo's hand away and stood up on her own, lifting her wheezing son into her arms. "Take me to him," she said, her voice devoid of fear, replaced by a cold, protective fury. "But if any of your people touch my son, I will find a way to burn Castellano Enterprises to the ground." Matteo offered a faint, grim smile. "We will see about that. This way, Mrs. Jennings." The armored Audi A8 tore up U.S. Route 41, leaving the grim, blood-stained reality of Logan Square far behind. Inside the heated, leather-scented cabin, Selena held a sleeping Leo tightly against her chest. His breathing had steadied thanks to the emergency inhaler, but the rattle in his lungs remained a constant, terrifying soundtrack to their flight. Beside the driver, Matteo sat in the passenger seat, his eyes constantly scanning the dark tree lines and rear-view mirrors. He hadn't spoken a word since ushering them into the vehicle. An hour later, the Audi slowed, turning onto a private, winding road in Lake Forest. Imposing wrought-iron gates, flanked by stone pillars and high-definition security cameras, swung open silently. They drove up a meticulously plowed, quarter-mile driveway until a sprawling 1920s Tudor mansion loomed into view, its leaded glass windows glowing warmly against the bitter Chicago night. "We're here," Matteo announced, stepping out to open Selena's door. "Welcome to the Castellano estate." Selena stepped into the freezing air, clutching her son. The front doors opened before she even reached the stone steps. Standing in the foyer, illuminated by a cascading crystal chandelier, was Damien Castellano. He had discarded his suit jacket, wearing only a tailored white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint, intricate black ink. "Take the boy to the East Guest Wing," Damien ordered, his voice echoing in the cavernous entryway. "Dr. Cole is already waiting." Selena's grip on Leo tightened. "Who is Dr. Cole? I'm not letting a mob doctor touch my son." Damien's pale blue eyes locked onto hers, stripping away her defiance with absolute calm. "Dr. Harrison Cole is the former chief of pediatric pulmonology at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I pay him a very exorbitant retainer to be available to my family at all hours. Your son is struggling to breathe, Mrs. Jennings. Let the doctor do his job, or continue to let your pride suffocate him." The harsh truth of his words stung, but she couldn't deny the rattling in Leo's chest. Reluctantly, she allowed a stern-faced housekeeper named Beatrice to lead her and Leo down a hallway, lined with priceless Persian rugs and Renaissance oils. The guest room was larger than Selena's entire apartment, boasting a massive four-poster bed and a roaring fireplace. True to Damien's word, an older man with kind eyes and a stethoscope was waiting. Dr. Cole worked efficiently, administering a high-grade nebulizer treatment and checking Leo's vitals. Within 20 minutes, Leo was breathing freely, tucked under a goose-down duvet, fast asleep. "His lungs are severely inflamed, likely from the cold and the stress," Dr. Cole told Selena softly, packing his leather medical bag. "I'll prescribe a daily corticosteroid and keep an oxygen concentrator here just in case. He needs rest, warmth, and absolutely no stress." "Thank you," Selena whispered, tears of profound relief finally spilling over her eyelashes. "I don't know how I'll pay for this, but Mr. Castellano has already covered everything," Dr. Cole said gently. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Jennings." When the doctor left, Selena couldn't sleep. The adrenaline in her veins had turned to battery acid. She left the bedroom, the heavy oak door clicking softly behind her, and wandered back toward the center of the house. She found Damien in a sprawling, mahogany-paneled library. He was standing by a roaring hearth, pouring a measure of amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 heavy tumblers. "Macallan 25, Damien said without turning around. "You look like you could use it." Selena walked in, keeping a safe distance. "I don't drink." "Tonight, you do," he replied, turning and extending a glass toward her. She took it, letting the smoky, rich scent burn her nose. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You could have let the Volkovs kill me. It would have tied up a loose end for you." Damien took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes never leaving her face. "The Volkov Bratva has been trying to usurp my shipping routes for 6 months. They stepped into my city, kicked in the door of an apartment in my territory, and tried to murder a woman holding a sick child. That is an insult I do not tolerate. So, I'm just a matter of territory? Selena asked bitterly. You are a complication, Damien corrected, setting his glass on a leather-topped desk. Your husband, David, stole from me. He has the decryption keys to $8 million. But more importantly, he has the physical ledger he stole from my father's safe before he faked his death. I want that ledger. I told you, I didn't even know he was alive until tonight, Selena snapped, stepping forward. He left us with nothing. He let me believe I buried him in a closed casket while Leo was in the ICU. Do you honestly think if I knew where he was, I would be serving steaks at Gibson's for tip money? A heavy silence fell over the library. Damien studied her, analyzing the raw, jagged pain in her voice. For a fraction of a second, the ice in his eyes thawed, replaced by a flicker of dangerous curiosity. I believe you, Damien said softly, which makes David Jennings not only a thief, but a coward of the highest order. But the Volkovs don't care about your innocence, Selena. They believe you know where the ledger is. As long as you are out there, you are bait. Here, you are under my protection. I don't want to be protected by a monster, she whispered. Damien took a step toward her, his imposing frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. He stopped mere inches away. She could smell sandalwood, scotch, and gunpowder on him. There are worse monsters in the dark than me, Selena, he murmured, his voice a low rumble. And right now, I am the only thing standing between them and your son. 4 days blurred into a surreal, gilded captivity. The Lake Forest estate was a fortress of luxury and lethality. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter with Belgian Malinois attack dogs, while inside, Beatrice prepared gourmet meals that Selena could barely stomach. Yet, for the first time in his life, Leo was thriving. The constant, ambient heat of the mansion, the high-quality air purifiers Damien had ordered installed, and Dr. Cole's medications had worked a miracle. Leo ran through the sprawling halls, playing hide-and-seek with Mateo, who, despite his status as a ruthless enforcer, seemed surprisingly patient with the energetic 6-year-old. Selena, however, felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. She spent her days pacing the library, reading through the Castellano Syndicate's chilling history on the dark web using an encrypted iPad Damien had provided. She was terrified of the man keeping her captive, yet she found herself watching him. She noticed how Damien rarely slept, how he carried the immense weight of his empire with a stoic, brutal grace. On the 5th afternoon, the illusion of safety shattered. Selena was in the kitchen, slicing apples for Leo, when Mateo strode in, his face a mask of grim urgency. The boss wants you in the war room, now. Selena dropped the knife. She wiped her hands on a linen towel and followed Mateo down a hidden staircase beneath the main floor into a state-of-the-art subterranean command center. Banks of monitors glowed, displaying security feeds and streams of scrolling code. Damien was leaning over a glass table with a young, heavily tattooed man typing frantically on a mechanical keyboard. Sit, Damien commanded, not looking up. Selena pulled up a metal stool. What's happened? Are the Volkovs? Quiet, Damien interrupted. He tapped the glass table, and a screen flickered to life, displaying a paused surveillance video. The footage was grainy, bearing a timestamp from 3 days ago. It showed a man in a heavy peacoat walking down a snow-covered street. The camera zoomed in on his face as he paused under a streetlight to light a cigarette. Selena's breath caught in her throat. The room spun wildly. It was David. He looked older, gaunter, his hairline receding, but it was undeniably the man she had married. This is Rue St. Catherine in Montreal, Damien said, his voice flat. My contacts spotted him Tuesday night. He's alive, Selena, and he's panicked. Tears of rage and shock blurred Selena's vision. He's alive. He really is alive. Wyatt, Damien said to the tattooed hacker. Show her. Wyatt tapped a few keys. We finally cracked the first layer of encryption on the USB drives you found in the briefcase, Mrs. Jennings. But there's a secondary failsafe, a biometric and alphanumeric lock. If we guess wrong 3 times, the drive wipes itself. It wipes the 8 million, and it wipes the location of the physical ledger. Damien turned to Selena, his pale eyes piercing her. The password hint embedded in the code is simple. It says, "The day the curse broke." Selena stared at the screen, her mind racing back through a decade of memories. The day they met? Their wedding day? Leo's birthday? "He's an accountant," Damien pressed, stepping closer to her. Numbers, dates, significant events. He left this hint, knowing if he ever lost the drive, only someone who truly knew him could open it. The Volkovs don't know the answer. Do you? Selena closed her eyes. The day the curse broke. David hadn't been a romantic. He rarely remembered their anniversary. But there was one thing he was fiercely, almost obnoxiously passionate about. The Chicago Cubs. He had a superstitious obsession with them. He called their century-long losing streak the curse of the Billy Goat. Her eyes snapped open. The 2nd of November 2016, she breathed. Damien looked at Wyatt. Type it. Wyatt's fingers flew across the keyboard. Format? Try 110222016, Selena said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Wyatt hit enter. A red progress bar appeared on the main screen, stalling at 99%. The room held its breath. Then, the screen flashed bright green. Access granted. I'm in, Wyatt exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. Files began populating the screen. Bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, routing protocols for shell companies in Panama. But as Wyatt scrolled down, his face went deathly pale. Boss, Wyatt stammered, stepping back from the monitors. This isn't just your money. Damien pushed past the hacker, his eyes scanning the documents. Selena watched as the muscles in his jaw tightened, a terrifying, lethal stillness settling over him. What is it? Selena asked, standing up. It's an extortion list, Damien said, his voice dropping an octave, laced with absolute venom. David didn't just steal from me. He used my network to hack the Volkov-Bratva's servers. He has a list of every dirty politician, federal judge, and DEA agent on the Russian payroll. He's been blackmailing the Volkovs for the last 3 years. Selena felt the blood drain from her face. He's blackmailing the Russian Mafia? He's a dead man walking, Damien corrected coldly. And worse, the Volkovs think I orchestrated it. They think my syndicate holds this list. This isn't just a turf war anymore, Selena. This is an existential threat to both families. Before Damien could say another word, an ear-splitting alarm began wailing throughout the subterranean bunker. Red strobe lights flashed, bathing the room in a bloody hue. Mateo's hand flew to his earpiece. Boss. Perimeter breach. The front gates just got blown off their hinges. We have 3 black SUVs pushing up the driveway, heavily armed. The Volkovs hadn't waited. They had come to Lake Forest. Damien turned to Selena, moving faster than she could process. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. Mateo, secure the drive and scrub the servers. Selena, you are coming with me. We are getting your son, and we are getting out of this house. They're here. Selena panicked, her mind instantly flying to Leo upstairs. Leo? The mahogany staircase felt like a mountain as Selena scrambled upward, her hand locked in Damien's unyielding grip. The blare of the security klaxons was deafening, but it couldn't drown out the distinct, terrifying chatter of automatic gunfire echoing from the front courtyard. The Volkovs weren't sending a message. They were executing a massacre. Stay low, Damien roared over the din, pulling her down as the magnificent stained glass window at the landing shattered inward. A hail of bullets tore through the priceless 17th century tapestry hanging on the opposite wall, filling the air with plaster dust and shredded wool. Selena coughed, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she thought it might crack her sternum. Leo, he's in the East Wing. I know, Damien said, his pale eyes completely devoid of panic. He was a creature built for violence, operating with a cold, terrifying efficiency. He unholstered a second weapon, a sleek, compact Sig Sauer P-365, and shoved it into Selena's trembling hands. Safety is off. Point and pull the trigger. Do not hesitate. If it isn't me or Mateo, you shoot. Selena stared at the cold steel in her hands, the weight of it heavy, with deadly promise. She had never fired a gun in her life. But as another volley of shots rattled the mansion's foundation, the primal instinct to protect her child overrode her pacifism. She gripped it tightly with both hands. They reached the East Wing corridor just as a massive, bearded man in tactical gear kicked in the door to the library behind them. Damien didn't even break his stride. He pivoted on his heel, raised his Glock, and fired 2 suppressed rounds in rapid succession. The man crumpled instantly, his assault rifle clattering to the hardwood floor. "Move," Damien commanded, pushing her forward. They burst into the guest suite. Dr. Cole had already pulled Leo from the bed and was shielding the terrified, wheezing boy in the corner behind a heavy oak armoire. "Mommy," Leo shrieked, his face pale and streaked with tears. "I've got you, baby," Selena sobbed, dropping to her knees and pulling him against her chest. She pressed his face into her shoulder to muffle the sounds of the dying house. "We're going to play a game of hide and seek, okay? You have to be as quiet as a mouse." Damien crossed the room to Dr. Cole. "Take the medical bag. We are moving to the subterranean garage. The primary escape tunnel is compromised. We're taking the G-Wagon. Mr. Castellano, the boy's oxygen levels are dropping rapidly from the panic," Dr. Cole warned, his hands shaking as he packed his supplies. "He needs the portable concentrator." "Bring it," Damien barked. He turned to Selena, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "Hold him tight. Keep behind me." The descent to the garage was a descent into hell. The mansion, once a bastion of silent luxury, was now a war zone. Smoke from a flashbang grenade drifted through the hallways, stinging their eyes. Mateo met them at the entrance to the lower levels, his tactical vest dusted with drywall and blood, none of it his own. "3 vehicles in the courtyard," Mateo reported rapidly. "We have heavy casualties among the outer guards. It's a full Bratva hit squad led by Nikolai Volkov himself. They're trying to breach the bunker to get the servers." "Let them," Damien sneered, swiping a keycard to open the reinforced steel door leading to the garage. Wyatt initiated the thermite protocol. By the time they breach the server room, the hard drives will be a puddle of molten slag. Get the armored Mercedes. The garage was a cavernous concrete bunker housing a fleet of luxury cars. Mateo sprinted toward a matte black, armor-plated Mercedes AMG G63. He threw open the rear doors. "Get in," Mateo yelled. "Doctor." Cole climbed in first, pulling the heavy oxygen concentrator with him. Selena threw Leo into the back seat, scrambling in after him. Before Damien could join them, the reinforced steel door they had just come through buckled violently with a deafening boom. A breaching charge. The heavy metal blew outward, sending shrapnel tearing across the garage. Through the smoke stepped Nikolai Volkov. He was a terrifying figure, draped in a heavy trench coat, wielding a heavily modified AKS 74U. He spotted Damien instantly. "Castellano!" Nikolai roared, raising his weapon. "Drive!" Damien yelled to Mateo, slamming the heavy armored door of the Mercedes shut, effectively locking Selena and Leo inside the bulletproof cabin. Selena screamed as she watched Damien dive behind a concrete pillar just as Nikolai opened fire. Sparks showered the garage as bullets chewed through the concrete and ricocheted off the Mercedes' ballistic glass. Mateo gunned the engine. The massive V8 roared to life. He slammed it into gear and hit the accelerator, the tires screeching on the polished concrete. Through the tinted rear window, Selena watched in horror. Damien leaned out from cover, firing methodically. She saw him flinch violently, his left shoulder jerking back as a round clipped him. He didn't fall. He fired 3 more shots, hitting Nikolai squarely in the chest. The Russian mobster stumbled backward, his body armor absorbing the brunt of it, but giving Damien the window he needed. Damien sprinted toward the moving vehicle. Mateo slammed on the brakes for a microsecond. Damien grabbed the handle of the passenger door, ripped it open, and threw himself inside just as Mateo smashed through the garage's secondary egress doors, launching the heavy SUV out into the blinding, snowy Chicago night. The drive north was a blur of high-speed evasion and terrifying silence. They abandoned the bullet-riddled Mercedes at a private airstrip in Kenosha, boarding a sleek Gulfstream G650 that was prepped and waiting on the tarmac. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised hues of purple and gray, they were descending toward a remote, privately owned strip in Door County, Wisconsin. Throughout the flight, Damien had refused medical attention from Dr. Cole, insisting the doctor focus entirely on stabilizing Leo's breathing. He sat in the leather captain's chair, his face a mask of stone, a dark red stain slowly spreading across the crisp white fabric of his dress shirt. They finally arrived at a modernist glass and timber cabin hidden deep within the snow-laden pines of Ephraim. It was an off-the-grid Castellano safe house, devoid of internet, but heavily stocked with provisions and medical supplies. Once Leo was asleep in the loft, hooked up to the portable oxygen machine under Dr. Cole's watchful eye, the adrenaline finally began to drain from Selina's veins, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. She walked downstairs to the open-concept living area. A fire was roaring in the massive stone hearth. Damien sat on the edge of a leather sofa, his shirt discarded, revealing the extensive black ink that crawled across his ribs, and back a sprawling, intricate depiction of a two-headed eagle clutching a serpent. Mateo was standing over him, attempting to clean a nasty, jagged graze on Damien's left deltoid with a bottle of antiseptic. "You're doing it wrong," Selina said, her voice surprisingly steady in the quiet cabin. Mateo paused, looking at her in surprise. Damien slowly turned his head, his pale eyes locking onto hers. The usual cold calculation in them was dimmed, replaced by a raw, simmering exhaustion. "I handled the chaotic trauma unit at Lurie Children's when they were short-staffed," Selina said, walking over and taking the gauze and saline from Mateo's hands. "You're just wiping the blood around. You need to flush the debris out first. Mateo, go check the perimeter." Mateo looked to his boss for confirmation. Damien gave a barely perceptible nod. The enforcers silently left the room, leaving them alone save for the crackling fire. Selina knelt beside the sofa. Up close, the sheer physical presence of Damien Castellano was overwhelming. His skin was hot to the touch, and she could see the faint tremor of muscle fatigue in his jaw. "This is going to sting," she murmured, uncapping a bottle of sterile saline. "I've felt worse," Damien replied, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. As she flushed the wound and carefully applied pressure to stop the lingering bleeding, a profound, heavy silence stretched between them. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer just the terrifying mob boss sitting behind a mahogany desk. He was the man who had taken a bullet to ensure her child made it to a bulletproof car. "Why did you shut the door?" Selina asked softly, wrapping a clean white bandage around his muscular bicep. "You locked us in. You left yourself exposed." Damien looked down at her. Her dark hair was a mess, her hands were stained with his blood, and she wore a borrowed, oversized sweater. Yet he looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "My world is built on acceptable losses, Selina," Damien said slowly, his ice blue eyes tracing the curve of her cheek. "My men, my properties, my money, they are all replaceable metrics. But when I looked at you and your boy in that garage, I realized I was not willing to accept the loss." Selina's hands stilled on the bandage. The confession hung in the air, heavy and loaded with implications she was terrified to dissect. She had spent the last 3 years grieving a man who had faked his own death, convinced she was fundamentally unlovable. Now, the most dangerous man in Chicago was looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. "David sent a message," Damien continued, his tone shifting back to business, though his eyes remained locked on hers. "Wyatt intercepted it while we were airborne. It was sent to an old, dormant email address of yours." Selina rocked back on her heels, the warmth of the moment evaporating instantly. "What did it say?" Damien reached his good arm over to the coffee table, handing her a satellite phone with a printed transcript on the screen. Selina read the text, her blood running cold. "Selina, I know Castellano has you. I know he's looking for the ledger. I don't care about him, but I need my son. Bring Leo to the Ritz-Carlton in Montreal by Friday. Room 412. Come alone. Do this, and I give Castellano his ledger, and the Volkovs back off. Disobey me, and I send the decryption keys to the feds, and Castellano's empire burns to the ground. You have 48 hours. He wants to trade the ledger for Leo, Selena whispered, a wave of pure nausea washing over her. The man she had loved, the father of her child, was using their sick son as a bargaining chip in a Mafia war. He's out of his mind. He thinks I would ever hand Leo over to him. He is desperate, Damien said, sitting up, ignoring the wince of pain from his shoulder. He has the Volkovs hunting him for the blackmail, and he has me hunting him for the theft. He thinks having the boy gives him leverage over me because he knows I am protecting you. Selena looked up, a fierce, protective fire igniting in her chest. The terrified waitress from Logan Square was dead. I'm going to Montreal, Selena stated, her voice devoid of hesitation. Absolutely not, Damien snapped, his protective instincts flaring. It's a trap. He is cornered, and cornered rats bite. I am sending a strike team to room 412. I will retrieve the ledger, and I will bring you his head. If you send a strike team, he'll spook. He'll leak the files, and the feds will tear your life apart, Selena argued, stepping closer to him, refusing to back down. He expects me. I am the only one who can get close enough without him pulling the trigger on those files. Damien stood up, towering over her, his expression a storm of conflict. I am not putting you in the crosshairs of a man unhinged enough to fake his own death. You don't have a choice, Selena countered, pressing her finger against his uninjured chest. He is my husband. He abandoned my son. This is my fight now, Damien. Leo stays here with Dr. Dopper, Cole and Mateo. You and I go to Montreal. We get your ledger, and I look the ghost in the eye and tell him he is dead to me. Damien stared down at the fierce, beautiful woman before him. He had spent his life surrounded by hardened killers, yet none of them possessed the sheer, unbreakable steel he saw in Selena Jennings. A slow, dark smile touched the corners of his mouth. Very well, Mia Luce, he murmured, using the Italian term of endearment almost unconsciously. We go to Montreal. But if David Jennings so much as breathes in your direction, I will not hesitate to put him in the ground for real. The Gulf Stream touched down at Montreal Pierre Elliott Trudeau International Airport under the cover of a blinding snowstorm. Selena stared out the oval window at the swirling white vortex, feeling a cold detachment settle over her. The terrified mother who had wept on the floor of a Logan Square apartment was gone, burned away by betrayal, and replaced by a woman forged in the fires of the Castellano syndicate. Beside her, Damien was a study in lethal focus. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal overcoat that concealed the Kevlar vest beneath, his injured shoulder moving with stiff but deliberate precision. He hadn't tried to stop her from coming, but he had orchestrated the infiltration with the meticulous paranoia of a warlord. The Ritz-Carlton on Sherbrooke Street is heavily monitored, Damien said, handing her a microscopic earpiece. My Vanguard team has already secured the room adjacent to 412. Wyatt has looped their security feeds. I will be on the other side of the adjoining door. If he makes a sudden movement, if his voice raises above a conversational baseline, or if you feel even a fraction of a second of doubt, you say the word, checkmate. I will breach. Selena took the earpiece, her fingers brushing against his. He won't hand over the ledger until he sees Leo. He will, Damien promised, his pale eyes dark with violent intent, because once he realizes you came alone, he will try to leverage your life instead. He is a coward, Selena. Cowards always seek the path of least resistance. 2 hours later, Selena stood in the opulent, gilded hallway of the Ritz-Carlton. The thick, floral-patterned carpet muffled her footsteps. She was dressed impeccably in a dark wool trench coat and a silk scarf clothing Damien had procured for her, armor to mask her vulnerability. She stopped in front of room 412. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she knocked 3 times. A heavy silence stretched. Then, the slide of a deadbolt, echoing like a gunshot. The door opened a crack, secured by a brass chain. A pair of bloodshot, erratic eyes peered out from the shadows. You're alone, a raspy voice demanded. It was David. Hearing his voice, the voice that had whispered vows to her, the voice she had mourned over an empty casket, sent a spike of pure nausea straight through her stomach. I'm alone, Selena said, her voice dripping with ice. The chain rattled, and the door swung wide. Selena stepped into the suite. The man before her was a grotesque caricature of the husband she remembered. David Jennings had always been neat, a man who ironed his khakis and obsessed over his spreadsheets. This man was gaunt, his skin a sickly, pallid gray, his hair thinning and greasy. He wore a rumpled dress shirt, and the stench of stale whiskey and sour sweat hit Selena like a physical blow. The lavish suite was a rec room, service trays piled high, papers scattered across the mahogany desk, and the curtains drawn tight against the Montreal skyline. David slammed the door shut behind her, his eyes darting frantically to the hallway before engaging the deadbolt. He turned back to her, his gaze sweeping over her high-end coat. "Look at you," David sneered, a nervous, manic energy radiating from him. "Sleeping with the wolf. Selena, I leave you for 3 years, and you upgrade to the boss of the Castellano family?" "Where is the ledger, David?" Selena asked, ignoring his bait, standing her ground in the center of the room. David's face twisted in sudden rage. He stepped forward, grabbing her roughly by the shoulders. "Where is my son? I told you to bring Leo. The deal was the ledger for the boy." "Take your hands off me," Selena commanded, her voice vibrating with a quiet, lethal authority she didn't know she possessed. David blinked, momentarily stunned by the steel in her eyes. The old Selena would have shrunk away, apologizing, crying. This Selena shoved him backward with a strength born of pure maternal fury. "Leo is safe," she snarled, stepping into his space. "Safe from the Russian Mafia you blackmailed, safe from the freezing apartment you left us in, and safe from a father who faked his death to steal $8 million. You let me believe you burned to death, David. I had to tell our 4-year-old son that his daddy was in heaven while I begged the hospital not to cut off his oxygen." David dragged a shaking hand down his face, pacing like a caged animal. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. Castellano is a monster. I was laundering his blood money. I saw an out. I took the money to set us up for life." "For us?" Selena laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You didn't take us with you. You left us with $14,000 in medical debt." "I had to lay low," David shouted, spit flying from his lips. "The Volkovs found out I hacked their servers. I was trapped, but I have the leverage now. Castellano's physical ledger has the names of 3 sitting U.S. senators and 2 federal judges. The Volkov drive has the Russian hit list. I am a god right now, Selena. I hold the strings to the entire underworld." "You're not a god, David," Selena said softly, pity finally mixing with her disgust. "You're a dead man walking in a nice hotel." David's manic pacing stopped. His eyes darkened, snapping to the heavy leather duffel bag on the bed. He reached inside and pulled out a silver Kimber 1911 pistol, racking the slide and aiming it directly at Selena's chest. "Call him," David demanded, his hands shaking so violently the gun's barrel wavered. "Call Castellano. Tell him to wire the $8 million to my Cayman account and bring the boy to the lobby, or I put a bullet in you and release the files to the FBI right now." Selena looked down the barrel of the gun. She didn't feel fear. She felt absolute, crystalline clarity. "Checkmate," Selena whispered. Crash. The heavy, soundproofed adjoining door didn't just open, it exploded off its hinges. Splinters of wood and torn drywall filled the air as Damian Castellano stepped through the ruin like a force of nature. David spun, firing a wild, panicked shot. The bullet shattered a crystal lamp on the bedside table. Damian didn't flinch. He didn't rush. With terrifying, calculated precision, he raised his suppressed Sig Sauer and fired once. The shot caught David in his right shoulder, spinning him violently. The Kimber 1911 flew from his grasp, clattering uselessly across the marble floor. David collapsed, screaming in agony, clutching his shattered collarbone as blood rapidly soaked his rumpled shirt. Damian stepped over the debris, his pale eyes locked onto the writhing man. He kicked the dropped weapon under the heavy oak dresser, then placed his polished Oxford shoe squarely on David's bleeding shoulder. pressing down with agonizing weight. David howled, his face turning an ashen gray. "David Jennings," Damien said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "You stole from my family. You brought the Bratva to my doorstep, but your greatest sin was laying a hand on the mother of your child. Please," David begged, tears streaming down his face, coughing up a speck of blood. "Please, Damien, I'll give you the ledger. It's in the floor, safe beneath the rug. The code is Leo's birthday. Just let me live. Let me walk away." Damien looked at Selena. The choice hung in the air between them. Damien was a king of the underworld. Taking a life was business. But this was Selena's ghost. Selena walked slowly to where David lay groveling. She looked down at the pathetic, broken man who had caused her so much agony. "I thought killing you would bring me peace," Selena said quietly, looking into David's terrified eyes. "But you're already dead to me. You died 3 years ago on the I-90. She turned to Damien. "Get the ledger. Leave him." Damien's eyes flashed with a mixture of surprise and profound respect. He stepped off David. He walked to the center of the room, kicked back the Persian rug, and punched the code into the floor safe. He retrieved a heavy, leather-bound book and a secondary encrypted hard drive. "The Volkovs are currently hunting you, David," Damien said, sliding the ledger into his coat pocket. "Without this leverage, you have nothing. I won't kill you. I will let Nikolai Volkov's lieutenants do it for me. You have perhaps 24 hours before they track this location." Damien extended his uninjured hand to Selena. She took it without hesitation. They walked out of room 412, leaving David Jennings sobbing on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of his own greed, waiting for the wolves to arrive. The transition from winter to spring in Chicago brought a hard-won thaw. The fallout from Montreal was swift and brutal, though invisible to the civilian world. With the physical ledger secured, Damien's empire was impenetrable. Armed with the Volkov's blackmail files from David's drive, Damien didn't go to war. He orchestrated a masterpiece of extortion. He systematically dismantled the Volkov Bratva's Chicago operations, forcing their lieutenants into permanent exile under threat of federal exposure. The streets were quiet. The Castellano syndicate reigned supreme, uncontested. 6 months after the snowstorm in Montreal, Selena sat on the sprawling limestone terrace of the Lake Forest estate, sipping espresso. The morning sun warmed her face, a stark contrast to the freezing L-train platform where this nightmare had begun. A joyful shriek broke the morning silence. Down on the manicured lawn, Leo was sprinting, a kite string clutched in his small hands. His cheeks were flushed, his laughter ringing clear and unhindered. The daily corticosteroid treatments from Dr. Cole, combined with the stress-free environment, had worked wonders. He hadn't touched his emergency inhaler in over 4 months. Chasing closely behind him, effortlessly keeping pace in a tailored suit despite the heat, was Mateo. The lethal enforcer had become an impromptu uncle, teaching Leo how to play chess and throw a perfect spiral. "He's getting faster," a deep, resonant voice said from behind her. Selena turned as Damien stepped onto the terrace. He had discarded his suit jacket, his tie loosened. The ruthless, icy exterior he presented to the world was entirely absent. When he looked at Selena, the pale blue of his eyes held only warmth. He stepped up behind her chair, his large hands resting gently on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing circles on her collarbone. "Doctor?" "Cole said his lung capacity is up by 30%. Selena smiled, leaning her head back against his chest. She breathed in the familiar scent of sandalwood and clean linen. "He's thriving, Damien. He is a Castellano now," Damien murmured, pressing a soft kiss to the crown of her head. "He will want for nothing in this world, and neither will you." A week prior, the private adoption papers had been finalized by Damien's army of lawyers. David Jennings had officially been declared deceased again. His body had been found in a shallow grave outside Quebec, courtesy of the remnants of the Volkov family. Selena felt no grief when the news arrived. The ghost had finally been laid to rest. Wyatt finished scrubbing the last of the offshore accounts, Damien said, stepping around the chair to sit on the stone balustrade facing her. The 8 million your ex-husband stole has been routed back through our legitimate holding companies. I put it in a trust. In Leo's name. It will vest when he turns 25. Selena stared at him, overwhelmed. Damien, that's Mafia money. That's blood money. It was blood money, Damien corrected softly. Now, it is foundation money. I am restructuring the syndicate, Selena. The ports, the legitimate shipping lines, the real estate. We are expanding the light and severing the dark. It will take time, but I will not have my son inherit an empire built solely on violence. My son. The word settled over Selena's heart like a heavy, protective blanket. She stood up, closing the distance between them. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the faint, white scar on his left shoulder where the bullet had grazed him in the garage. You're changing the world for us, she whispered. Damien reached down, framing her face with his calloused hands. You changed my world, Selena. You walked into the lion's den with a stolen briefcase and a demand for respect. You didn't flinch. You gave me something I didn't know I was looking for. What's that? She breathed, her heart accelerating as he leaned in. A queen who isn't afraid of the dark, Damien replied. He kissed her, deep and consuming. It wasn't the desperate, frantic collision of their early days. It was a kiss of absolute certainty, a promise sealed in stone. Selena wrapped her arms around his neck, anchoring herself to the most dangerous man in Chicago, knowing unequivocally that it was the safest place she could ever be. Below them, on the sunlit lawn, Leo's kite caught a strong gust of wind, soaring high above the fortress of Lake Forest, leaving the shadows far behind. Single mom returned, a lost briefcase. To a mafia boss inside was a secret that changed her fate, is a testament to the unpredictable nature of desperation and the lengths a mother will go to protect her child. Selena Jennings's journey from a debt-ridden waitress to the fierce matriarch of an underworld empire explores the blurred lines between morality, survival, and justice. What began as a horrifying collision with the Castellano syndicate evolved into an unearthing of deep betrayals from her past. By facing the ghost of her treacherous former husband, Selena reclaimed her autonomy. Ultimately, Damien Castellano, a man defined by ruthlessness, found redemption in her unwavering strength. Together, they forged an unbreakable bond out of shattered trust and violence, proving that sometimes, stepping directly into the shadows is the only way to finally find the light.